The assassin's arrival. The sun was setting behind the tall, distant buildings of Earth's sprawling metropolis. The evening air was cool, a slight breeze blowing through the streets, but the peace was deceptive. Somewhere, in the midst of all this quiet, a deadly force was about to strike. The assassin moved silently through the shadows. Her name was Kyra, a trained killer from a far-off alien world. Her mission was simple: find her target and eliminate him. She had been hired by a powerful alien syndicate that had its eyes on a human, an ordinary man, or so they thought. To the syndicate, humans were nothing more than an obstacle, a species to be controlled and wiped out if necessary. But this human had crossed them, and now he was going to pay. Zira had been traveling for days, weaving through different planets, hopping from one star system to another, until she finally arrived on Earth. She was efficient, focused, and deadly, traits that had made her one of the most feared assassins in the galaxy. She had been sent to kill countless beings, alien and human alike, and had never failed. But there was something different about this mission. Her target, known only as Mark, was no ordinary human. The syndicate hadn't told her much about him, just that he had been involved in a string of events that had led to the syndicate losing a significant amount of power. He was a threat, and threats had to be dealt with. The assassin was not one to question her orders. Her job was clear, and she was prepared to do it. But something about the mission felt strange. It wasn't the location. Earth was a chaotic planet, full of noise and life, where a killing could easily be hidden among the confusion. It wasn't the target. Humans were weak, fragile beings, easily disposed of with the right strategy. It wasn't even the fact that her target was in a major city, surrounded by people. It was the feeling she couldn't shake. Something gnawed at her, a small but persistent voice in the back of her mind that whispered that this mission might not go according to plan. Zira shook her head, pushing the feeling aside. She had a job to do, and there was no room for doubt. She was a professional. She was an assassin, and nothing had ever stopped her before. As she approached her target's location, a quiet, run-down apartment building on the edge of the city, she slowed her pace. The building was dark, a few lights flickering from behind closed windows. There were no sounds, no signs of life. She moved silently across the cracked sidewalk, her footsteps muffled by the night, blending in with the shadows around her. She paused just outside the entrance, her sharp eyes scanning the area. She didn't like to be followed. She didn't like surprises. But Earth was full of them, and she couldn't afford to be careless. Kyra had learned to trust her instincts over the years, and tonight, her instincts were on high alert. The door to the apartment building was unlocked. She pushed it open with a soft creak, slipping inside. The air smelled stale, as though it had been trapped in the building for years. There was no sign of movement, no indication that anyone had noticed her presence. But she wasn't fooled. Humans were unpredictable, and she had learned to expect the unexpected. Her target's apartment was on the 3rd floor. She made her way up the creaking staircase, each step echoing in the stillness. She didn't rush. She knew better than to hurry in these situations. She had to be careful. The slightest mistake could be her last. As she reached the top of the stairs, she paused, her senses tingling. She could feel the presence of someone inside the apartment. Her target was there, waiting. Kyra's fingers twitched around the hilt of her energy blade, ready to strike at a moment's notice. She moved toward the door, her breath steady. Her hand rested on the handle, and she paused once more. There was something off about the whole situation. The human was waiting for her, but there was no fear, no panic. In fact, it seemed like he was expecting her. A sense of unease washed over her, but she quickly pushed it away. She had a job to do. With a swift motion, she twisted the door handle and stepped inside. The apartment was small and dimly lit. The air inside felt heavier, almost suffocating. Mark, the human she had been sent to kill, was standing by the window, staring out into the night. He didn't turn when the door opened. He didn't move. He didn't even flinch. Zira's eyes narrowed. This was wrong. Every human she had encountered before had reacted to her presence with fear, desperation, or even anger. But this one, he stood there, almost calmly, like he had no idea what was about to happen. Or worse, like he didn't care. "You're here to kill me, aren't you?" Mark's voice broke the silence. His tone was steady, casual, as if he were discussing the weather. "Go ahead. But know this, I'm not the one you should be worried about." Zyra's breath caught in her throat. The words hit her like a sudden shock. What did he mean by that? How did he know she was here to kill him? The suspense in the air was thick, and for the first time in years, doubt crept into Sarah's mind. She wasn't sure what she was walking into anymore, but one thing was clear. This mission was about to take an unexpected turn. The human didn't seem afraid, and that alone was enough to make her pause. Could this be the beginning of a bigger game, one she wasn't prepared for? Or had she simply underestimated her target? Zyra's grip tightened on her blade, but she couldn't shake the feeling that someone, was waiting for her. The unexpected encounter. The tension in the room was palpable. Zyra, the highly skilled alien assassin, stood motionless by the door, staring at Mark. Her hand instinctively tightened around the hilt of her energy blade, her eyes scanning the room for any signs of danger. She had encountered hundreds of people over her long career, but this human, he was different. He wasn't cowering or pleading for his life like the others. Instead, he stood tall, his back straight, his posture calm. It was as if he were welcoming death itself, staring it down with unwavering confidence. Mark's voice, still cool and collected, echoed in the room. "You're here to kill me, aren't you?" The simplicity of the question struck Zyra with an odd sense of confusion. Most targets had reacted with fear, shock, or even anger when faced with their inevitable end. But Mark, he was calm, almost detached from the situation. This was not how things were supposed to go. "Go ahead," Mark continued, as if he had already accepted his fate. "But know this, I'm not the one you should be worried about." Zyra's eyes narrowed. What did he mean by that? She could sense no fear from him, no desperation, just an unsettling calm. Her mind raced, analyzing every word, every movement. How could he know she was here for him? And more importantly, how could he be so indifferent to it? For a moment, there was silence. Zyra didn't move. She couldn't afford to make a mistake. She had been in countless situations like this before, but something about this one felt wrong. Her instincts, usually so sharp and reliable, were telling her to proceed with caution, but she was a professional. She had always trusted her training, her superior senses, and her ability to adapt. She stepped forward, the soft sound of her boots barely audible on the wooden floor. Mark remained unmoving, his gaze still fixed on the night sky outside the window. His back was to her, but she knew better than to assume he wasn't aware of her every move. He wasn't panicking. He wasn't trying to escape. He was waiting. "I have a job to do," Zyra finally said, her voice steady, though she couldn't fully suppress the doubt creeping into her mind. She moved closer, positioning herself just a few feet behind him. The energy blade hummed in her grip, ready to strike. Mark didn't flinch. He didn't even turn to face her. Instead, he sighed softly and spoke again. "You don't have to do this, you know." Sarah froze, her eyes narrowing in disbelief. She had faced countless beings who begged for their lives or tried to fight back. But this was something entirely different. It wasn't just a refusal to fight. It was almost like he was trying to communicate something deeper. Was he trying to manipulate her? Or was there something more to this than just an ordinary mission? "I've been running for too long," Mark continued, his voice quieter now, almost as if he were talking to himself. "But what you don't understand is that I'm not afraid to die. And I'm not the one you need to fear." Zyra's mind raced. What was he talking about? She had never encountered a human so indifferent to his own death. Most of the humans she had hunted fought until the very end, clawing for survival. Yet here stood Mark, accepting his fate, as if it had already been sealed. There was something deeply unsettling about his calmness, something that sent an uncomfortable shiver down Zaira's spine. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice cold but laced with curiosity. Mark finally turned to face her, his eyes meeting hers. There was a flicker of something in them, something she couldn't quite place. It wasn't fear, nor anger. It was understanding, as if he knew exactly who she was and what she had come to do. His face softened, and for the briefest moment, Zaira could see a hint of empathy. "You think I'm just a pawn in some galactic game," Mark said, stepping slowly toward her. "But the truth is, I'm not. I'm not some helpless human you can just kill without consequence." Zaira didn't react. She was trained to mask her emotions, to focus solely on the task at hand. But inside, a small, gnawing doubt began to grow. What was he talking about? What consequences was he referring to? She had dealt with the highest levels of alien politics and warfare. Surely, this human couldn't have a role in anything that could threaten her. "I've been running from something much bigger than you," Mark continued, his voice growing more intense. "The people who sent you, they don't even know the half of it. They have no idea who they're dealing with." Zaira's mind raced. Was he trying to deceive her, or was he telling the truth? The words "much bigger than you" echoed in her mind, and for the first time, she felt a flicker of doubt in her heart. The mission that had seemed so simple now felt complicated. She had never questioned her orders before, but something about this situation didn't sit right with her. "You don't understand," Mark said, his voice almost pleading now. "You don't know what you're stepping into. You were sent here to kill me, yes, but you're not just killing a human. You're killing someone who has been chosen for something far greater than either of us." Zaira felt her pulse quicken. There was an unfamiliar weight in Mark's words, and it unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. Her grip on the blade tightened, but she didn't move. She had to stay focused. She couldn't allow herself to be swayed by whatever this human was trying to do. But even as she thought that, a voice inside her asked, "What if he's right? What if this isn't just another routine kill?" Mark took another step forward, his eyes never leaving hers. "You're an assassin, Zaira, but I'm not like the others, and killing me won't end the game. It will only make things worse for both of us." The room grew heavier. Zaira's mind churned with questions, doubts, and curiosity. She couldn't deny it anymore. This mission was unlike any other, and she had no idea what she had truly walked into. Would she go through with the kill, or was there something else waiting for her in the shadows? The human's counter. The silence in the room was thick. Mark's words echoed in Zaira's mind, and for the first time, she found herself at a crossroads. Her training had never prepared her for a moment like this. She had been a hunter, always one step ahead, always in control of the situation. But now, standing in front of Mark, something had shifted. It wasn't just his calm demeanor that unsettled her. It was the sense that he knew something she didn't, that he was holding something back, something far more dangerous than she had anticipated. Zaira's fingers gripped the energy blade tighter, its hum vibrating in her hands, but she didn't strike. She couldn't. Her instincts told her to take him down, to finish the job, but there was something in the air, an unspoken challenge that made her hesitate. Mark looked at her, his eyes unwavering, as though he could sense her internal struggle. "You're not going to kill me," he said quietly, the certainty in his voice making her heart skip a beat. "You can't." Zaira's eyes narrowed, her focus returning. The situation was slipping out of her grasp, and she knew that she needed to regain control fast. She couldn't afford to show any sign of weakness. She had never failed before, and she wasn't about to start now. "You don't know what you're dealing with," Zaira growled, trying to shake off the unease. "I'm an assassin. I've killed hundreds of beings across the galaxy. None of them were ready for me. You're no different." Mark raised an eyebrow, not fazed by her threat. He didn't back away or prepare to defend himself, nor did he seem afraid. Instead, he took a slow, deliberate step toward her, closing the distance between them. His expression was calm, but there was an intensity in his eyes now, something more than just resignation. "I've seen more than you think," Mark said, his voice steady, almost soft. "You think you're the only one trained to fight, to kill, to survive. Maybe you've never met someone like me before, but you're not prepared for what's coming." Thyra stiffened, her mind racing. She had dealt with many creatures, warriors, and assassins from across the galaxy, but she had never encountered a human with this kind of composure, this kind of presence. Most humans would have been trembling by now, pleading for their lives. But Mark, he was different, calm, self-assured, almost like he had expected this encounter. As if he had seen it all before, Mark continued, his voice growing more intense. "You were sent to kill me, but you don't understand why. They didn't tell you everything, did they? About what I've done, who I've become, about what I can do." Thyra's mind raced. What is he talking about? Her eyes darted around the room, searching for any signs of deception, but there were none. Mark's posture was relaxed, his face unreadable, yet there was something in his words that seemed to hold more weight than she had originally believed. Mark took another step forward, his eyes locking onto hers. "You see, Thyra, I'm not just any human. I've been through things that would break most people. I've survived wars, betrayals, and even death itself. But what you don't know is that I've learned to use that, to turn it into something powerful." Thyra felt a cold shiver run down her spine. She had heard of humans who had survived extreme circumstances, some even becoming stronger because of it. But this was different. There was something in Mark's eyes, a fire, a resolve, that she couldn't quite understand. It was as though he was offering her a glimpse of something deeper, something far more dangerous than she had ever encountered. "Stop," Thyra said, her voice more forceful now. "Enough with the games. You're just a human, and I've been trained to deal with your kind." But Mark wasn't intimidated. Instead, he smiled slightly, a small, knowing smile that sent a chill through Thyra's chest. "I'm not trying to play games," Mark replied, his voice calm but full of quiet authority. "I'm telling you the truth. You came here to kill me, but you don't know what you're really dealing with. I'm not just a target. I'm someone who has seen the worst the universe has to offer and survived it. And I've learned how to use that survival to my advantage." Thyra's grip on her blade tightened again, but her mind was no longer focused solely on the task at hand. She was trying to make sense of what Mark was saying, trying to figure out if he was lying, or if there was some deeper truth to his words. Could it be possible that this human had truly experienced the kinds of things he was describing? Could it be that he had more power than she had given him credit for? Mark took one final step forward, and this time, Thyra didn't move. He was close enough now that she could feel the heat from his body, but she didn't strike. Instead, she stood there, watching him carefully, waiting for the next move. "I've been hunted," Mark said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've been pushed to the edge, but I survived, and I'm still standing." The words hung in the air between them. Thyra's mind raced, trying to process what he was saying. If what he was saying was true, if he had survived something so intense, then maybe he wasn't just another helpless human. Maybe he was more than she had given him credit for. But how could that be? What had he been through? What made him so different? Mark's eyes never left hers. "You want to kill me, but you don't understand. I'm not the prey here. I'm not the one who's helpless. I've become something more, something you don't even realize." For a moment, Thyra stood frozen, her hand still clutching her blade, but her thoughts were now consumed by the realization that this mission was nothing like the others. There was something powerful about this human, something dangerous, and for the first time, she wasn't sure if she could go through with it. She had come here to kill him, but now, with every word he spoke, Thyra found herself questioning her own certainty. What if Mark was telling the truth? What if this human had the power to fight back in ways she couldn't yet comprehend? Zaira could feel it now. There was a force in the room, an energy that neither of them could deny. The moment had shifted. And now, more than ever, Zaira realized that this was no ordinary mission. She wasn't just up against a human. She was up against something far more complex, and perhaps even more dangerous. The alien's moment of doubt. The room was silent again, but this time, the silence was heavy with uncertainty. Zaira stood perfectly still, her fingers still gripping the energy blade, its faint hum filling the air. But her mind was no longer as clear as it had been when she first entered the apartment. Mark's words, his confidence, his calmness, it was all starting to unravel her certainty. She had always relied on logic, on the cold, calculated nature of her training. She had been groomed to be an assassin, a predator in a galaxy full of prey. And for years, it had been enough. She had been the hunter, always one step ahead, always in control. But now, standing before Mark, something inside her had shifted. Her unwavering certainty was starting to crack. What was it about him? Mark's words echoed in her mind. He wasn't just any human, he had said. He was different. He had survived things that should have destroyed him, things that Zaira couldn't even fathom. But how? What had he gone through? Was it even possible that a human, a fragile species so far below her in terms of physical strength, could possess something more than what appeared on the surface? The nagging doubt began to grow louder in her mind. This mission wasn't like any other. She could feel it now, deep in her core. Her instincts, which had always served her well, were telling her that something was wrong. But was it her instincts that had failed her? Or was it that she had underestimated this human in ways she hadn't thought possible? Mark, sensing her hesitation, took a small step forward. His eyes locked onto hers, his gaze unwavering, calm. He wasn't afraid. And that was the part that made Zaira uneasy. Most humans she had encountered, even those with some semblance of fight in them, were still driven by fear. But Mark, he stood there, unafraid, almost as if he knew something she didn't. "I can see it in your eyes," Mark said softly, his voice not mocking, but understanding. "You're wondering if you've made a mistake." Zaira's heart skipped a beat. Her composure faltered for just a split second, but she quickly regained control. She wasn't going to let him see her doubt. She couldn't afford to. "I don't make mistakes," Zaira replied, her voice cold, but there was a slight edge to it now. She was trying to sound more confident than she felt. Mark didn't seem to be affected by her words. If anything, his calm demeanor only intensified. "But you're questioning it, aren't you?" he asked, his voice gentle but firm, almost like a whisper that carried more weight than any shout could. "Deep down, you know I'm not just any human. And you're wondering why that is." Zaira felt a sinking feeling in her chest. How could he know? She had always been the one in control, the one who held all the power in any given situation. But here she was, questioning everything she had believed in, questioning the certainty that had guided her through countless missions, countless assassinations. She clenched her jaw and took a step back, trying to distance herself from the whirlwind of emotions whirling inside her. "Focus," she told herself. "You can do this. You are the assassin. He's just a human." But as she stood there, her mind kept returning to the same question. What if he's right? Mark's voice cut through her thoughts, pulling her back to the present. "You've been trained to see humans as weak, as inferior," he said, his voice still calm but full of quiet conviction. "You think we're just creatures to be disposed of, don't you? You think we're nothing more than prey, ready for the taking." Zaira's eyes narrowed, but she didn't respond. She had heard these words before, from countless beings who had underestimated humanity. Humans were often seen as the lowest rung of the galactic ladder, an easy target for those who considered themselves more powerful, more evolved. She had bought into that narrative for years, but now, in Mark's presence, she felt a crack in her conviction. He was right. She had been trained to see humans as inferior. But Mark didn't fit that mold. He was different, and that made him dangerous in a way she hadn't prepared for. "Tell me," Mark continued, his voice gaining strength, "do you really think you're the first alien assassin to come to Earth with the same mission? Do you really believe you're the first to think that you can just eliminate someone like me?" Zyra's breath caught in her throat. Her mind raced. What did he mean? She had been told this was a simple job. Track the human, eliminate him, and report back. There was nothing more to it, nothing to question. But now Mark was speaking as if there was more to this than she had been led to believe. "No," Mark said before she could respond, almost as if he had read her thoughts. "You're not the first, and you won't be the last. But I've survived every time, and I will survive this." Zyra's grip on the energy blade tightened. She wasn't sure whether it was out of anger or fear. Survived every time. The words haunted her, and for the first time, she found herself questioning the information she had been given about her target. Was he really just a simple human, a mere pawn? Or was there something more to this? Something that the syndicate had overlooked? Mark stepped closer, his voice almost a whisper now. "You're here to kill me, Tyra. But what if I'm not the one you should be worried about? What if I'm the one who's been playing a game all along?" The last part of his sentence sent a chill down Zyra's spine. Playing a game. She had never been one to fall into traps or get caught in games. She was always the one pulling the strings, the one orchestrating the kill. But now, standing before Mark, she wasn't so sure anymore. He wasn't just any human. He wasn't an easy target. And there was something in the way he spoke, something in his eyes, that made her wonder if he knew more than he was letting on. Her mind was spinning, doubt clouding her thoughts. She had never been one to let emotions get in the way of a mission. But this time, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a simple kill. This was something deeper, something far more complicated. And for the first time in her career, Tyra felt like she was the one being hunted. A change of heart. Tyra stood motionless, the weight of Mark's words still pressing down on her. She could feel the tension in the air, thick with uncertainty and fear. Fear of failure, fear of the unknown, fear of the strange new emotions creeping into her consciousness. She had always prided herself on being in control, always cold and methodical, but now, faced with Mark's calm and conviction, she found herself questioning everything she had been taught. It was almost as if Mark had reached inside her and pulled out the one thing she had kept buried all these years: doubt. He had done what no one else had been able to do. He had made her wonder if her whole life, her purpose, and everything she had worked for had been a lie. Her grip on the energy blade loosened, and her thoughts raced in a way they never had before. Was it possible? Could a human, someone she had always considered weak and insignificant, really possess such power? Or was it all just a trick, a psychological game designed to weaken her resolve? Mark had been right about one thing. She had always been taught to see humans as little more than targets, as creatures to be eliminated when they became inconvenient. They were fragile, weak, and easily disposed of. But now, standing in front of him, she wasn't so sure. There was something different about him, something beyond just survival. He wasn't like any other human she had encountered. The way he carried himself, the way he spoke, it was as if he had seen beyond the surface, beyond the simple task of killing and being killed. Her thoughts drifted back to the words he had said. "I've survived everything, and I will survive this." There was power in that statement, an unwavering belief that no matter what she did, he would find a way to rise above it. It wasn't arrogance, it was something deeper. It was as though he had tapped into a strength that Zyra couldn't even comprehend. Something inside her stirred, something she had long ago buried. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't sure if she wanted to go through with the kill. She took a step back, her breath coming faster now, and Mark's eyes never left her. He had seen her hesitation, had sensed the crack in her armor, and he didn't push her. He simply stood there, calm, waiting. There was no malice in his expression, no anger. He wasn't trying to provoke her. He was simply offering her the truth, whatever it was, without the need for violence. "I don't want to kill you," Zaira said, her voice barely above a whisper, the words leaving her mouth almost before she realized she had said them. It was a confession she never thought she would make. For years, she had killed without question, without remorse, without hesitation. But now, here she was, standing in front of a human who had somehow broken through the impenetrable walls she had built around herself. Mark's expression softened, but there was no triumph in his eyes. He hadn't won. He had simply spoken the truth, the same truth that was now unraveling the assassin she had always been. "You don't have to," Mark said quietly, his voice filled with a strange mix of empathy and understanding. "You don't have to do this. You've been conditioned to believe that this is your purpose, that killing is the only thing that matters. But it's not. It doesn't have to be." Zaira clenched her fists, trying to push back the wave of emotions threatening to overtake her. She had always believed that her mission was her purpose, that the orders she received were everything. To follow them was her only duty. She was an assassin, nothing more, nothing less. But Mark's words had struck something inside her, and she couldn't silence it. "I've been trained to kill," she said, the words almost a defense, an attempt to justify her existence. "That's all I know." Mark nodded slowly, his eyes still locked on hers. "I know. But I've been trained to survive, just like you've been trained to kill. The difference is, I chose to survive. I chose to fight, to live, no matter what it took. And I didn't do it for anyone else. I did it for me. You can do the same." Zaira's mind whirled. Could she? Could she walk away from everything she had known? Could she let go of the only identity she had ever had, the one thing that had defined her for so long? The idea of walking away from her mission, from her purpose, was almost unbearable. It felt like a betrayal, like she was turning her back on everything she had ever been taught. But in Mark's eyes, she saw something different. She saw the possibility of freedom, the possibility of choosing a new path, a path that didn't involve bloodshed, a path that didn't define her by the destruction she had caused. The assassin inside her fought against the human emotions threatening to surface. "No, you can't be weak," her mind screamed. "You are strong. You are a weapon. You have a mission." But then another part of her, a quieter, softer part, asked, "What if strength is not about killing? What if it's about choosing not to?" Zaira took another step back, her mind in turmoil. She had been trained to strike without mercy, to follow her orders without question. And yet here she was, questioning everything she had ever known. Mark was right. She had been a tool, a weapon for so long, and she had never once considered what it meant to be something more. The change wasn't immediate. It wasn't like flipping a switch. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it was beginning to grow. Zaira had always believed that to survive, she had to kill. But what if survival wasn't just about strength and force? What if survival was about making choices that went beyond the violence, beyond the bloodshed? "You're not the only one who survived," Zaira said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "I've survived my own battles. I've faced things that would have broken most. But what you're saying, it's different. It's not about killing. It's about living." Mark smiled, not triumphantly, but gently. "Exactly. You've already survived, Zaira. But now it's time to live. And living means more than just following orders. It means choosing your own path." For a moment, Zaira stood there, torn between the assassin she had always been and the human Mark had shown her she could be. The assassin had always believed that death was the answer. But now, standing in front of Mark, she wasn't so sure. Her blade, once a symbol of her power, felt heavy in her hand. She had come here to take a life, but now, the weight of that decision felt unbearable. She let out a slow breath and, with a trembling hand, lowered the energy blade. She wasn't sure if it was the right choice, but for the first time in her life, she felt something other than cold certainty. "I'm not going to kill you," Zaira said, her voice steady but soft. "But I don't know what's next." Mark's smile widened slightly. "That's okay. You don't have to know yet, but you've already taken the first step." Zaira stepped away from him, her mind still reeling from the transformation she had just undergone. She had changed in that moment, in that decision. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. She had chosen to walk it without blood on her hands. And for the first time, she felt free. A new alliance. The weight of Zaira's decision lingered in the air like a fog, thick and heavy. As she stood there, no longer an assassin but not yet something else, she felt a mixture of relief and fear. For the first time in her life, she wasn't following the cold, calculated path laid out before her. She had chosen a different road, one that was uncertain and uncharted. But the very fact that she had made that choice felt like the first true sign of her freedom. Mark stood a few paces away, watching her with an unreadable expression. His face wasn't filled with victory or triumph. Instead, it was quiet, calm, almost as if he had been waiting for this moment to happen. He knew this wasn't about winning or losing. It was about a shift in perspective, a change that Zaira had to come to on her own. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence between them was no longer uncomfortable, but contemplative, as if the gravity of what had just transpired had to settle. Zaira looked at Mark, his steady presence offering her a sense of assurance that for once, she wasn't the one with the upper hand. She wasn't the predator, the killer. She was something else now, something raw, something human. "I don't know what to do now," Zaira said, her voice barely above a whisper, her fingers still trembling slightly from the tension that had gripped her earlier. "You've changed everything I thought I knew." Mark didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped closer to her, his presence calm and reassuring. He had faced death many times, fought battles both external and internal, and somehow he always came through. He wasn't someone who clung to the past or the identities forced upon him. He had learned to grow, to adapt, and that was exactly what he saw in her now. Someone who was on the brink of transformation. "You don't have to know everything right now," Mark finally said, his voice low, understanding. "What matters is that you've made a choice, and that's the hardest part, the most important part. You've chosen to be something more than what you were trained to be. That's the first step to becoming something greater." Zaira turned her head slightly, studying him. "You make it sound so simple, but I've been an assassin for so long, Mark. I've killed. I've followed orders without ever questioning them. And now I have no idea who I am without all of that." Mark smiled gently, as if he understood the struggle far too well. "You've been living according to a set of rules someone else made for you. But what if those rules were wrong? What if you've been living someone else's life all this time? You're not bound by your past, Zaira. You're free to write your own story." Zaira felt something stir deep within her. The way Mark spoke, the way he had survived and fought, not just with strength, but with a kind of wisdom that was both humble and fierce. It was unlike anything she had ever encountered before. She had been so wrapped up in the idea of being a weapon, in the idea that her purpose was to kill, to be the tool of destruction, that she hadn't stopped to think what her life could be beyond that. "I'm not sure how to start over," she admitted, the vulnerability in her voice surprising her. "Everything I've ever done, everything I've ever been, it's all wrapped up in this one thing. I was always the assassin. But now you're free," Mark interrupted, his voice firm but kind. "Free to make your own choices, to do something meaningful. You're not bound by the past anymore." Zaira's mind raced as she thought about what it meant to be free, to live outside the narrow confines of her former life. She had been an assassin, yes, but that wasn't all she was. There had to be more to her, more than just being the instrument of someone else's will. She had the ability to change, to create a new future for herself, one that didn't revolve around death and destruction. "I don't know what's out there," she said, looking down at her hands, which still seemed alien to her. They were not the hands of a killer anymore. But I know I don't want to go back to who I was. Mark gave her a small nod. That's all you need to know. The rest will come in time. No one expects you to have all the answers right away. For the first time in a long while, Syra allowed herself to breathe. To really breathe, without the constant pressure of being an assassin weighing her down. There was a flicker of hope inside her, a tiny ember that hadn't been there before. She could see a path opening before her, though it was still unclear. But it was hers to walk, and that thought was exhilarating. Then, as if the weight of the decision had finally settled into her bones, something unexpected happened. Mark looked at her with a serious expression. "There's still something you should know," Mark said, his voice low and steady. "Even if you've chosen to walk away from the life you've known, the past doesn't always stay quiet. There are those who will come after you. They won't let you go so easily." Syra looked up at him, a sharp edge returning to her gaze. She hadn't forgotten about the Syndicate, the very reason she had been sent to Earth in the first place. The powerful alien organization that had hired her would never let her just walk away. She had known it, and she had feared it. But now, with Mark standing beside her, she felt a flicker of confidence she hadn't known before. "I'm not afraid of them," Syra said, her voice gaining strength. "I'm done being their weapon. And if they want me back, they're going to have to fight for it." Mark studied her for a moment, as though weighing her words carefully. "Good," he said, his voice laced with approval. "You're starting to understand. The truth is, you've always had the power. You just had to see it." Syra stood straighter, her eyes meeting his with a newfound resolve. She wasn't just Syra the assassin anymore. She was someone more. Someone who could choose her own future. She didn't know exactly what lay ahead, but for the first time, she felt ready to face it, whatever it was. "I'm with you," Mark said, his voice steady and sure. "You're not alone in this. We'll take them down together." Syra gave a small nod, a sense of determination welling up inside her. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. She wouldn't face it as the killer she once was. She would face it as someone who had found a new purpose, a new path, and someone who would fight for her freedom and her future. In that moment, Syra understood. She was no longer the hunter. She was the one who chose the fight. And she wasn't going down without one. Together with Mark, she would carve out a new life, one that was hers to define. The Syndicate might come for her, but she wasn't afraid anymore. Because for the first time in her life, Syra knew she had the power to choose her own fate. The final showdown. The day had come. Syra could feel it in the air, thick with anticipation, and the weight of decisions made. The alliance she had formed with Mark wasn't just a bond between two individuals anymore. It was a force that had the power to shake the foundations of the galaxy. She wasn't just a former assassin anymore. She was someone who had taken control of her destiny, someone who had chosen to fight for something greater than herself. But even with the clarity of purpose, there was no denying the danger that awaited them. The alien Syndicate that had once controlled her every move would not let her go without a fight. They were powerful, ruthless, and they had resources at their disposal that could make even the strongest of warriors tremble. But Syra was no longer the same person who had once carried out their dirty work without question. She had learned the true meaning of strength, and now she was ready to use it. Mark stood beside her, his calm resolve like a steady anchor in the midst of the storm. They had spent the past few days preparing, gathering intel, and strategizing. They knew the Syndicate's tactics, and they knew what to expect. But there was one thing they couldn't predict: the way the battle would play out. In the heart of a massive, bustling space station, the final confrontation was about to unfold. The Syndicate's headquarters was a towering fortress, guarded by the most advanced security systems and armed guards. It was a place Syra had once considered an impregnable stronghold, a place where she had been nothing more than a tool. But now she was walking toward it with her head held high as an equal. She was no longer the hunter. She was the one who would bring this empire of fear and control to its knees. The first wave of guards came at them with overwhelming force, But Sarah and Mark were ready. She was faster now, more precise than she had ever been, her movements flowing with a newfound grace. The skills she had honed over years of assassination were now her strength, but they weren't just about killing anymore. They were about survival. They were about fighting for something bigger than just completing a mission. She fought with purpose, her strikes lethal, but calculated. Every move was a step closer to her new life, one where she chose what happened next. Mark fought alongside her, his training in survival and combat complementing her own. He moved with a surprising fluidity, using his knowledge of the station to outsmart the guards. They weren't just fighting for their lives. They were fighting to reclaim their freedom, to show that even the most powerful forces in the galaxy couldn't crush the spirit of those who refused to be controlled. The deeper they moved into the station, the more intense the fight became. The Syndicate wasn't going to give up without a fight, and they knew their resources were vast. But Sarah wasn't intimidated. She had faced fear before, had been controlled by fear before, but not anymore. Now she embraced it. She knew that fear could either break her or empower her, and she had chosen to be empowered. By the time they reached the Syndicate's central command center, the hallways had become a battleground. The lights flickered overhead as alarms blared, warning of the intruders who had come to dismantle their empire. But Mark and Sarah were unstoppable. They moved through the station like shadows, swift and silent, leaving a trail of stunned guards behind them. Their coordination was flawless, a perfect blend of Sarah's precision and Mark's adaptability. The final door slid open, and there they were, the leaders of the Syndicate, the ones who had once controlled her every move. They were sitting comfortably, as if the chaos outside was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. But when they saw Sarah standing at the threshold, their expressions shifted. They recognized her, the assassin who had once been one of their most lethal weapons. They had no idea who she had become, what she had learned. "You're too late," one of them sneered, his voice dripping with arrogance. "You can't stop this. You're nothing but a rogue assassin, a tool who has outlived its usefulness." Zyra's eyes narrowed. The years of servitude to this organization had given her the knowledge she needed to bring it down. But now, it wasn't just about destruction. It was about justice. It was about showing them that they couldn't keep using people as pawns, couldn't keep silencing those who fought for their freedom. "You're wrong," Zyra said, her voice steady and cold. "I'm not just an assassin. I'm a survivor, and I'm not the one who's going to be defeated today." She didn't wait for them to respond. In a flash, she moved forward, taking out two of the guards who had tried to ambush them. Mark was right behind her, covering her back as they navigated the room with military precision. The Syndicate's leaders, once so sure of their power, were now scrambling, trying to regain control. But it was too late. The fight wasn't just physical anymore. It was ideological. As the battle raged on, Zyra felt a sense of clarity she had never known before. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for everyone who had been oppressed, everyone who had been crushed by the weight of powers that cared nothing for their lives. She was fighting for freedom, for the right to live on her own terms. The final showdown came when she faced the leader of the Syndicate. He stood at the center of the room, flanked by his remaining guards, a smug look on his face, as if he still thought he could control the situation. But Zyra knew better. She had already won, even before the fight had started. She wasn't the same person who had walked into this room. The leader drew a weapon, but Zyra was faster. She closed the distance between them in an instant, disarming him with a swift, decisive strike. He tried to fight back, but his movements were sluggish, his confidence shattered. Zyra held her ground, her energy blade at the ready. "You think you can stop me?" He spat, still defiant despite the circumstances. "You're just one person. You're nothing. I'm everything." Zyra replied, her voice unwavering. "And I'm done being controlled." With one final, swift movement, she incapacitated the leader, taking him down without a second thought. The Syndicate had fallen. Their reign of terror was over. As the alarm stopped, and the station fell eerily silent, Syra stood victorious, breathing heavily but with a sense of calm settling over her. The power, once held in the hands of the syndicate, now rested in her hands, and she wasn't going to use it for control. She wasn't going to use it to spread fear. She would use it to protect, to help others break free from the chains that had once bound her. Mark stood beside her, his expression calm but proud. "We did it," he said, his voice full of quiet satisfaction. Syra nodded. The battle was over, but their journey had only just begun. Together, they had fought for freedom. And now, they would fight to keep it. The universe was vast, and there were many more battles to face. But Syra knew one thing for sure. She would never again be the weapon she once was. She would be the one who chose the fight. And this time, the fight was for the future.